My faith in God has always been profound. From a young age, my mother taught me that faith rituals and learned the true essence of God. We are nothing, she would often remind me. Those words stayed with me as I grew older. During my teenage years, it became evident that my life was destined for his service. Becoming a priest wasn't just a decision, it was a calling, or so I believed. I spent years in seminary, delving into scripture, theology, and church doctrines. I memorized prayers, conducted rituals, and learned the true essence of guiding God's people. When the day of my ordination finally came, everything felt perfectly aligned. I had discovered my purpose, my mission. For many years afterward, I served in a small Mexican town where faith was an integral part of daily life. My belief in the divine never faltered, and that conviction led me through every step of my spiritual journey. The community placed their trust in me. They sought my unwavering faith. But in those quiet moments, a ritual. Was I genuinely leading my final prayers? I remained alone in the church, desperate prayer. Seeking guidance, an ounce of strength seemed to drain from me. The realization hit me like a physical blow with me, guiding me even in my darkest hour. How could I possibly voice such doubts? A priest was expected to be a rock of unwavering faith. But in those quiet moments, when the church was empty and the flickering candles cast dancing shadows on the ancient stone walls, the nagging doubt would resurface. I prayed earnestly every day, conducted Mass with heartfelt devotion, and honored every tradition handed down through the ages. Yet, there were times when I questioned if I truly understood the essence of God, or was merely performing a ritual. Was I genuinely leading people to Him, or was I simply upholding a fading institution? I tried to push these thoughts away, dismissing them as fleeting weaknesses of faith. However, they never truly left me. Then, one night, everything changed. It began like any other night. The town was enveloped in silence. Most people had retreated to their homes. Having finished my final prayers, I remained alone in the church, seated before the altar. The only sounds were the distant chirping of crickets and the soft whistling of the wind seeping through the time-worn wooden doors. I found myself staring at the large crucifix above the altar, focusing on Jesus' suffering face on the cross. What am I missing? I asked myself. Why do I feel so distant from you? I closed my eyes and offered a silent, desperate prayer, seeking guidance, clarity, anything to fill the emptiness within me. And then it started. At first, it was a subtle pressure in my chest, barely noticeable but undeniably present. I shifted in my seat, suspecting I'd been sitting too long, but soon the pressure intensified, spreading like wildfire through my ribs. I gasped, clutching my chest. Pain shot down my arm, and suddenly every ounce of strength seemed to drain from me. My vision blurred, with the candlelight stretching into surreal, distorted streaks. I tried to rise from the pew, but my legs failed me. My breath grew ragged, and my head began to spin as the world around me tilted uncontrollably. The hammering of my heart drowned out every other sound. I was dying. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My body was shutting down right there in the sanctuary I had dedicated my life to, utterly alone, with no one to call for help. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the altar, as if that touch could somehow anchor me, keep me present. But in that moment of despair, I felt a comforting presence. An inner voice whispered to me that I was not alone, that God was with me, guiding me even in my darkest hour. I clung to that spiritual reassurance, and an inexplicable peace began to wash over me. Though my body was weak, my spirit grew stronger. I knew that whatever happened, my faith in divine guidance would sustain me. And so, with a newfound trust, I surrendered to God's will, certain that he would not abandon me. My strength abandoned me abruptly, and my thoughts became distant echoes, but in a way I had never felt before. Mind blank, my body numb, always understood it. Yet I could feel sides, and the faint glow of the candles danced across, observing the scene from above, unable that danced among the pews. There's only ever-shifting silhouettes, but their faith in a higher power reasserted itself in that instant, and my thoughts became distant echoes. Then everything went silent. No pain, no noise, just an all-encompassing void. I lost all sense of time as I floated in that emptiness. Seconds, minutes, or hours could have passed. Time itself seemed to disappear. Then, slowly, something shifted. A peculiar sensation enveloped me, as if I were being lifted, not physically, but in a way I had never felt before. I became aware of the room again, though it appeared different. It was like I was seeing it from a new perspective. And then I saw myself, lying still on the floor, my own lifeless body below me. I was no longer confined within it. In that moment, I realized I had died, the moment when everything went dark. I had thought that would be the end. My mind blank, my body numb, as if all the weight, the pain, and the turmoil of life had vanished in an instant. Yet what followed was beyond anything I could have imagined. At first I felt a gentle sensation, like being suspended underwater, weightless and detached. Slowly, the darkness around me began to shift, giving way to something entirely new. I no longer had a body, at least not in the way I had always understood it. Yet I could feel myself moving, ascending. The sensation was unique, as if an invisible force was drawing me upwards. I didn't resist. I'm not even sure I could have, and then I saw myself again. I was there, sprawled on the cold tile floor of the church, utterly still. My body seemed small and fragile, like an empty shell. My arms lay limp at my sides, and the faint glow of the candles danced across my pale face. I even noticed a small pool of blood on the floor, where my head had struck. It was surreal, seeing myself from that distance, but I felt no fear. I should have been panicking, shouldn't I? Instead, a strange calmness settled over me, as if the chaos of the world had been left behind. I remained suspended there, observing the scene from above, unable to move closer or pull away. Even the church surrounding me seemed transformed. It wasn't simply a change in perspective. It was as if the very essence of the place had shifted. The warm, familiar sanctuary where I had prayed, preached, and served for so many years now felt utterly alien. And then I noticed it, a shadow. It lurked just beyond the reach of the flickering candle light that danced among the pews. At first, I dismissed it as a simple trick of the light, but I soon realized it was moving closer, and it was not alone. Other shadows began to materialize, emerging from the darkness like tendrils of smoke. They moved in an unsettling, unnatural way, their forms twisting and turning as they advanced. I couldn't make out faces or distinguishing features, only ever-shifting silhouettes, but their presence was undeniable. The air grew thick and cold, heavy with a weight that pressed down on me, despite my lack of tangible form. But amidst that darkness and those shadows, I felt another presence, stronger, brighter. A force that filled me with peace and hope. It was as if an unseen hand held me, assuring me that I was not alone. My faith in a higher power reasserted itself in that instant, and I understood that whatever lay ahead, I was in the hands of something far greater and more benevolent. The tranquility I had felt earlier disappeared. It felt as though unseen hands were remembered every sermon I had preached, every caution I had growing into a low, threatening hum. pulling at me vanished instantly, replaced by a silence that resonated like a melody. I didn't feel lost or afraid. All embrace. I became aware, radiated love and compassion grip, but with an invisible force. It felt as though unseen hands were pulling at the essence of my soul, drawing me away from the altar's light and into the looming darkness. I resisted, struggling as one does against an overpowering current, but the harder I fought, the stronger the pull became. Panic surged within me as I realized I couldn't halt it. Was this my destiny? Was this the end of my path? I remembered every sermon I had preached, every caution I had given about the perils of spiritual battles, yet I had never truly grasped it, not until this moment. The shadows were more than just a lack of light. They were alive, and they wanted me. My mind screamed in silent desperation, but I was voiceless. Without a voice, and without a physical form to express my fear, I could only watch as the shadows closed in, their whispers growing into a low, threatening hum. Then, just as the darkness seemed ready to consume me, something changed. A light appeared. At first, it was a faint glimmer in the distance. Gradually, it grew brighter, cutting through the shadows like a sharp blade. The darkness recoiled, and the shadows hissed and withdrew as the light spread. The oppressive force that had been pulling at me vanished instantly, replaced by a warmth I'd never experienced before. This light wasn't limited to the space around me. It filled me from within, permeating every part of my being. Overwhelming yet gentle, its radiance was pure and powerful, sweetly enveloping me. I couldn't look away. I was irresistibly drawn to it. This time, I didn't resist. As I moved closer, the murmurings of the shadows completely faded, replaced by a silence that resonated like a melody. It was serene and comforting, yet charged with an expectant energy, as if something extraordinary awaited me just ahead. The closer I got, the more I sensed it, a presence within the light. This illumination wasn't merely light itself. It was alive, brimming with love and power, and it was calling me. For the first time since my body had ceased to be, I didn't feel lost or afraid. All I felt was an irresistible pull towards something far greater than myself. In that moment, I understood that this was no accident, no fleeting dream. I was being drawn to something divine, something destined to change me forever. The light continued to envelop me, filling me with a warmth and peace I had never known before. As I moved deeper into its embrace, I became aware of a presence so profound and overwhelming that I instinctively understood I was approaching something beyond my comprehension. And then I saw him. In the very heart of the light stood a figure, radiant and distinct, as if he were both an integral part of the light and its very source. His features were unmistakable, yet held depths that escaped my understanding. His face radiated love and compassion, yet from it emanated an undeniable power, a silent authority that made everything else seem insignificant. All movement ceased, if such a thing could even be defined as movement. I was at a loss for words. What could I possibly say? I had spent my— "You have served me," he said, his tone, but I had never truly known him. Have you ever sought the essence of my heart? Or have it words? Tears welled up in— Jesus reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder for him. "I'm sorry," I said. His words were like a lifeline. Jesus smiled. And in that, what could I possibly say? I had spent my life proclaiming the name of Jesus, preaching his teachings, and urging others to follow him. And now, here I was, standing before him, completely unprepared. He stepped closer, and the love that radiated from him was almost overwhelming. It wasn't a love I had earned or deserved. It simply existed, vast and unconditional. "You have served me," he said, his tone both gentle and firm. "You have dedicated your life to my cause. But Javier, do you truly know me?" His question struck me like a bolt of lightning. My mind raced desperately for an answer. Of course, I knew him, didn't I? I had spent decades studying the scriptures, celebrating Mass, and teaching others about his life and sacrifice. Yet, there, face to face with Jesus, I realized something terrifying. I had never truly known him. I thought I did, I managed to whisper, even though my words sounded weak and empty. Jesus looked at me with an expression that mixed sadness and hope, as if he already knew my answer, but was waiting for me to discover it for myself. "You know of me," he said, gently but firmly. "You know the stories, the rituals, the words. But have you ever truly known me? Have you ever sought the essence of my heart? Or have you simply followed my commandments?" The truth in his words pierced me like a sharp sword. I had spent my life taking refuge in the rituals, structure, and traditions of the church, measuring my faith by the rigidity with which I adhered to its rules and precepts. But had I ever sought a relationship with him? Had I ever opened my heart to truly know him beyond the printed words? Tears welled up in my eyes as the enormity of it all washed over me. I remembered every sermon I had given, every piece of advice I had offered, every time I had urged others to put their faith in Jesus, while I myself had been too afraid to do the same. "I don't know," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I thought I was doing what you wanted. I thought I was serving you." Jesus reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder, and the warmth of his touch filled me with comfort and conviction. "You have done many good things, Javier," he said. "But faith is not defined solely by your actions. It's about who you are with me. It's about truly knowing me, loving me, and letting that love guide every part of your life." I could no longer hold back the tears. They streamed down my face as I fell to my knees before him. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I thought it was enough. I thought I was doing enough. But now I understand. I understand that I was missing the most important thing." Jesus knelt beside me, his face close to mine, his eyes filled only with love. "It's not too late, Javier," he said. "You can know me. You can still walk with me. Not just for my sake." His words were like a lifeline, pulling me out of the depths of despair into which I had sunk. For the first time, I understood the difference between the faith I had been practicing and the faith he was inviting me to embrace. It wasn't about the rituals, the structure, or the title I held as a priest. It was about him. "Teach me," I pleaded through my tears, looking into his eyes. "Teach me to know you." Jesus smiled, and in that moment, the light that surrounded us seemed to shine even brighter. "This is just the beginning, Javier," he said. His presence was undeniable. Instead, I found myself observing scenes from my as I sprinkled holy water and prayed for them without being fully present. Then, there for the rituals or the rules, they were searching, but I had allowed them to become the focus. I could only nod silently, speechless, who love one another. It is not made of stone or wounded by a family overcome with grief. Or at the transformative damning you. I know your heart. Something crucial, something that would fundamentally change me. "Javier," he continued, his voice gentle yet resolute, "you've dedicated your life to serving me, but there's a deeper truth you need to grasp." Before I could respond, the light changed again. Suddenly, I was no longer enveloped by its warmth. Instead, I found myself observing scenes from my own life, as if looking through a clear window. These weren't just memories, they were snapshots of my work as a priest, moments when I believed I was truly fulfilling God's will. But now, seeing them through his eyes, I noticed things I had previously overlooked. In one vision, I saw myself blessing a family's new home. The mother held her baby close, her eyes filled with gratitude as I sprinkled holy water and prayed for them. At the time, I had felt a surge of pride, convinced I was inviting God's presence into their lives. However, as I watched, I realized I had rushed that blessing, preoccupied with the next appointment on my schedule. I hadn't taken the time to truly listen to them, to understand their hidden fears or their unspoken hopes. I had performed the ritual mechanically, without being fully present. Then, the scene changed again. I saw myself delivering a sermon in a crowded church. I had spoken passionately about the importance of faith and obedience, confident that my words were inspiring the congregation to follow God. But as I watched, I started to notice faces in the crowd I had overlooked before, faces etched with doubt, with pain, with longing. They weren't just there for the rituals or the rules. They were searching for something deeper, something real, and I had missed it. I had never truly met them where they were. Tears welled up in my eyes as more scenes unfolded. Over and over, I witnessed moments where I had focused on the outward traditions of the church, neglecting the inner, deeper needs of those I was called to serve. It wasn't that the rituals were wrong in themselves. They had their rightful place. But I had allowed them to become the focus of my ministry instead of keeping Jesus at the center. "Do you see it now, Javier?" Jesus asked, his voice cutting through the heavy tide of my emotions. "Faith is not measured by the actions you perform. It is defined by the love you embody. Rituals are meant to lead you to me, but too often they become the destination instead of the path." I could only nod silently, speechless. The undeniable truth of his words struck me deeply. For so long, I had believed that being a good priest meant strictly following the rules, performing ceremonies, and upholding the church's traditions. But now, I recognized how shallow that understanding had been. Jesus continued, "The church is not simply an institution, Javier. It is my body. It is the people who seek me, who love me, and who love one another. It is not made of stone or wood, but of hearts open to my grace." As he spoke, the visions shifted once more. This time I saw moments where I had genuinely embodied his love without even realizing it. I saw myself sitting beside an elderly woman who had just lost her husband, holding her hand tenderly as she wept. I saw myself administering last rites to a young man in the hospital, surrounded by a family overcome with grief. I saw myself helping a poor farmer repair his roof after a storm, my own hands calloused from honest labor. "These are the moments when you truly knew me," Jesus said. "Not because of what you were doing, but because of how you were loving. These were the moments when your heart was in perfect harmony with mine." I felt overwhelmed by a mixture of awe and shame. Awe at the transformative power of love to illuminate even the darkest moments, and shame for the many times I had allowed the structure of my role to overshadow the essence of my calling. For every genuine connection, there were countless instances where I had prioritized ritual and routine over the intimate, loving presence of Jesus. Jesus stepped closer, his eyes filled with compassion. "Javier, I am not condemning you. I know your heart, and I understand the burdens you have carried. Trust in me, and together we will transform your ministry into a true expression of my divine love. Now you understand the spiritual reality, grace." "The gravity of his woo," I said, my voice quivering with emotions, fears, and questions that hadn't afraid. I was ready. As the Jesus drew closer, his gaze filled with but empty things. "I carry this mission forward, but mine," etched with a quiet desperation. Some were bird words recited, hymns sung, and A stranger offering kindness to someone. Words struck me, and I realized there was no turning back. I couldn't ignore what he had shown me, nor could I forget this spiritual reality. For so long, I had thought my role as a priest was to maintain the church, but now I saw it was about something much greater. Leading people to Jesus, helping them to know him as I was beginning to now. I want to choose you, I said, my voice quivering with emotion. I want to know you deeply, to live for you. Jesus smiled, and the light around him seemed to glow even brighter. Then, follow me, Javier, and trust that I will guide you every step of the way. As he spoke, a warmth filled my chest, a profound peace and sense of purpose unlike anything I had ever felt before. The doubts, fears, and questions that had haunted me for so long began to fade. They didn't vanish completely, but they no longer controlled me. That moment marked the start of something new, something genuine. The light around us shifted once more, and I sensed that my spiritual journey was far from over. There was still so much to see, so much to understand. Yet for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. As the radiant light enveloped me, I stood transfixed, overwhelmed by all that I had witnessed. The weight of my life, my decisions, my faith, my doubts pressed down on me. Yet amidst that weight, a clarity emerged. I finally understood what I had been missing, and my heart yearned to embrace this spiritual reality forever. Jesus drew closer, his gaze filled with both love and determination. I sensed that something momentous was about to happen, a turning point that would forever alter the course of my life. Javier, he said, his voice firm yet gentle, what you have seen here is not just for you. It is for them, for all those who are searching, for all those who are lost, and for those who have placed their faith in empty things. I nodded, speechless. My mind raced with questions. How could I, who had spent years focused on rituals and traditions, guide others towards something deeper? How could I possibly live up to the spiritual reality he had shown me? As if reading my thoughts, Jesus continued, "You are not called to be perfect. You are called to be faithful. It is not your strength that will carry this mission forward, but mine." He raised his hand, and in an instant, the light surrounding us shifted once more. Suddenly, I was no longer in that serene, radiant space. Instead, I found myself looking down upon our world, not its physical landscapes or nations, but its hearts, its lives, its souls. I saw people everywhere, caught up in their daily routines, their faces etched with a quiet desperation. Some were burdened by poverty, others by isolation or loss. Many, despite being surrounded by the comforts of life, harbored an emptiness within. The specifics varied, but the essence was the same, a deep longing for something more, for something real. I saw churches, some filled with people, others nearly deserted. In many, the focus was on rituals, on words recited, hymns sung, and traditions upheld. Yet I sensed a lack of true connection. They were like hollow shells, beautiful on the outside, but lacking the substance that gives life true meaning. And then I saw something else. I saw fleeting moments of genuine faith scattered like tiny beacons in the darkness. A mother lifting her prayers for her child, a young man choosing forgiveness over resentment, a stranger offering kindness to someone in need. These moments were modest and often unnoticed by them. Finally, I grasped, how can I reach them? How can I help them see what words took root in my heart like seeds planted in fertile soil and peace? Javier, he said, once held me back, were still there, but completely. He spoke one last time. The thing was certain. I was no longer the man I had been, weak, but I was alive. The word awake resonated. Finally, I grasped what he meant by, "It's not too late." Those people weren't beyond hope. They just needed someone to guide them. "Do you see, Javier?" Jesus said, his voice resonating through the vision. "This is the world I came to save, and it's the world I'm calling you to serve." Tears streamed down my face as I turned back to him. "But how?" I asked, my voice quivering. "How can I reach them? How can I help them see what I've seen?" Jesus smiled, his expression a blend of gentle encouragement and firm conviction. "By living the truth you now know," he replied. "Show my love instead of just speaking about it. Walk with them, don't stand apart, and remind them that their worth isn't defined by their actions, but by who they are. In me." His words took root in my heart like seeds planted in fertile soil. I wasn't sure how I would carry out this mission, but I knew I couldn't shy away from it. The world needed this message, this truth, and I'd been entrusted with spreading it. Before I could speak, Jesus raised his hand, and the light around us intensified, enveloping us both. I felt his hand on my chest, right above my heart. The warmth was immediate, spreading through me like a wave of energy and peace. "Javier," he said, his tone both authoritative and tender, "you are not alone. I will be with you every step of the way, in every word, in every moment. Trust in me, and I will guide you." As his hand rested on my chest, something within me shifted. It was as if a veil had been lifted, allowing me to see the world and my purpose more clearly than ever before. The doubts and fears that had once held me back were still there, but they no longer held the same power. They were overwhelmed by a profound sense of love, hope, and determination. Then the light around us began to change again, and I realized what was happening. My time in that radiant space was coming to an end. Soon, I would have to return to my body, to my life, and to the mission Jesus had entrusted to me. Before the light faded completely, he spoke one last time. "Remember, Javier, it's not about what you know, but who you know, and I have always known you." With those words, the light dimmed, and I felt myself gently pulled back, as if falling into the world I had left behind. The comforting peace of his presence lingered, even as the weight of my physical body returned. I didn't know what awaited me on the other side, but one thing was certain. I was no longer the man I had been before. I had been given a mission, and I knew I couldn't let him down. The first sound I noticed upon my return was the murmur of voices. At first, they were faint and distant, as if coming from a far-off place. Gradually, they grew clearer, agitated voices speaking in hurried, anxious tones. My chest felt heavy, and my body weak, but I was alive. I opened my eyes, squinting at the fluorescent light fixture on the ceiling. It took me a moment to realize where I was. The steady beep of hospital machines filled the space around me, and I could feel the constant flow of something cold running through the IV in my arm. A nurse leaned over me, relief softening her features as she saw me stir. "Father," she murmured gently, "you're awake." The word awake resonated with a weight I'd never felt before. I wasn't just physically awake. I was spiritually alert in a way I'd never known. The memories of what had just transpired, the brilliant light, my encounter with Jesus, and the mission I'd been given remained as vivid as the room in which I now lay. After the nurse departed, a doctor entered. Before Jesus, and now I had been granted a second far greater. Not only did I feel strong, or a stress-induced near-death experience, I think Jesus is really calling us to something different before. My heart had been transformed. Adherence to the church was the ultimate goal. I was there to guide, to love. As the months passed, in Christ's love, I no longer measured my worth of his presence. I realized, and in that moment, I felt but an opportunity to live with true purpose. The following days passed in a haze. Friends from the parish visited, offering prayers and heartfelt support. They called me fortunate, even blessed, to still be alive. I smiled and thanked them, but deep down I knew it wasn't just luck. It was something far greater. Not only did I feel stronger, but I began to share my experience. I recounted to my fellow priests what had happened, what Jesus had revealed to me through the light, the visions, and the profound truths he had imparted. I had learned that faith wasn't about titles or traditions. It was about truly knowing him. Most of my colleagues listened politely, though many dismissed it as a dream or a stress-induced near-death experience. One priest, speaking kindly but condescendingly, even warned me, "Don't read too much into it." But I couldn't just ignore what I'd experienced. In my heart, I knew it was real, and I wasn't alone in this belief. Some parishioners and friends listened intently, their eyes wide with wonder. "Father," one woman said, her voice trembling, "do you think Jesus is really calling us to something different?" "Yes," I replied firmly. "He's calling all of us, not to blindly follow rituals, but to truly know him, to live with love, humility, and compassion." That conversation marked the beginning of my new ministry. When I returned to the church, I knew things would never be the same. I couldn't just go through the motions, performing rituals and doing things mechanically as I had before. My heart had been transformed, and I knew my work had to reflect that change. I started focusing on the people, truly seeing them, listening to their struggles, and walking alongside them in their faith journeys. I spent more time with the sick, the poor, and the lost, offering not just prayers, but tangible expressions of Christ's love. My sermons evolved too. I no longer preached that strict adherence to the church was the ultimate goal. Instead, I spoke about Jesus, the relationship we could have with him, and how he desires to know us personally. I encouraged everyone to seek him not just through rituals, but with their whole hearts. Some embraced this transformation, feeling closer to God than ever before, while others resisted, clinging to the traditions they had known all their lives. And that was okay. I wasn't there to force change. I was there to guide, to love, and to embody the truth Jesus had shown me. It wasn't always easy. There were days when I felt overwhelmed by skepticism and resistance, wondering if I was doing enough or if I was failing the mission Jesus had entrusted to me. In those moments, I would remember his words. "You are not alone. I will guide you." Those words became my lifeline. As the months passed, the transformation within the parish became undeniable. People who had once felt detached from their faith began to find new meaning in their relationship with God. Families grew closer, neighbors became more compassionate, and the church went from being just a building to a vibrant community. For me, a peace settled in that I had never known before. The doubts that had once plagued me were replaced by a quiet confidence in Christ's love. I no longer measured my worth by my title as a priest or the perfection of my rituals. I now knew that my worth was in him, and that was more than enough. One evening, as I sat in the empty church with the candles flickering softly around me, I thought back to the moment I had collapsed that fateful night. The pain, the fear, the encroaching darkness. But even more so, I remembered the brilliant, radiant light of his presence. I realized that faith had never been about titles or traditions. It had always been about him, knowing him, loving him, and letting that love transform every aspect of our lives. Kneeling before the altar, I whispered a silent prayer, not for myself, but for those I was called to serve. "Lord, help me to show them what you have shown me. Help me to lead them to you." And in that moment, I felt his presence again, as real and powerful as it had been that night. I knew then that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was called to do. The journey was far from over, but I was ready for what lay ahead, trusting fully in divine guidance.